Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to set up combat in your text adventure. Now before I do this though, I want to warn you that adventure games in general are not about combat. They're about exploration and puzzle solving. RPGs are much more about combat, and we've had RPGs as long as we had adventure games. And here are some examples. Here, I'm going to just close this window and show you. This is screenshots from Ultima. This is a classic RPG for the Apple II. RPGs are still around. They're alive and well, just like the adventure game is. However, save your combat for the RPGs unless you need it to advance your story in some way. Now, it is totally fine to have a boss character that you need to defeat. It's fine to have a monster that you need to kill the monster. He drops a key. You use that key to unlock a door that you need to get something else, or that monster, NPC, whatever, is serving as a gatekeeper, and you need to defeat it to get to another part of your map. That's all fine. So I won't say no to combat. It definitely has a place in the adventure game genre, but don't add combat just for the sake of combat, right? Save it for the FPS, for the RPG, for those games. So now, what do we need to do if we want to have combat in our adventure game? We're going to need some variables. Variables are just chunks of the computer's memory that store a number. In most programming languages, it could be anything. In Lantern, it's a number. And the number has to be between 0 and 255. That's just a limitation of the way it is designed. And it turns out that that's perfectly fine, and we can do anything we need to with that. So what kind of variables do we need? Well, any enemy that you want to add to your game, I would add a variable to store its health. So I have a variable here called Ogre Health, and I've given it the initial value of 10. So the Ogre starts with 10 health points, and as we attack the Ogre, we can subtract health points one at a time. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll change it to 3 here. You'll see why in a second. And we're going to need some other variables to store things like how did we hit or not, and how much damage did we do. So I've got a variable called damage here, and it just starts out at 0, but it doesn't. The initial value doesn't matter. We're going to kind of compute new numbers for that later. And then let me add another variable here called hit. So hit will store whether we hit or not. We'll generate a random number, store it in hit, and then check it. And if it's like, if it's, we'll generate a random number between, 0 and 2, and if it's 0, then we hit, and if it's 1, then we miss, or something like that, or the opposite, right? So we just are going to use these variables to store kind of our dice rolls. Imagine we're playing dice. We're just going to store the results of our dice rolls in these variables. Okay, so now moving on, let's think about like an enemy that's guarding a door or something like that, which is the scenario we have here. He's standing in a location. He's not moving, and anytime we're in the same room as this monster, we want him to attack us. So that's an event. So I've got an event here called Ogre Attack, and this is where the Ogre attacks us, and I'll kind of walk you through what this code does. So this line here says if the Ogre's holder is equal to the player's holder, right? Now the holder for the player is the room the player is in, and for the Ogre it's also the room that the Ogre is in. So if the parent object of the player and the Ogre are the same, they're in the same room, right? If two objects have the same holder, they're in the same container or they're in the same room. So this is checking to see is the monster and the player are the monster and the player in the same room. Okay, so then if that's true, then we're going to do all of this stuff between the curly braces, right? So the curly braces group code together. Now let's look at the print line statement here. So we say, okay, print the Ogre attacks with his club. And then what does this line do? Let's take a look at this here. So we have a function built into Lantern called rand. And then inside of the parentheses, we supply the kind of the upper limit on the number we want. So rand 25 will give us a number between 0 and 25. And if you're wondering why I jumped there, I'm starting from the inside of the expression and I'm working outward. So I generate a number between 0 and 25, and then I add 25 to it. So what I've really done is I've generated a number between 25 and 50. So this is a way of generating a random number within a particular range. Okay, so this is going to be a number between 25 and 50. And then what I'm going to do is subtract it from health. Health is a built-in variable. It's the player's health. So I'm going to generate some random number and subtract it from the player's health. And then I'm going to assign that number back to the player's health, right? So I'm just taking the player's health, subtracting a random number from it, and assigning it back to the player's health. This is how I subtract something from the player's health. And now I have to check if the player is dead. Well, if our health is 0, we're definitely dead, right? So which leads us to wonder, like, what is this thing here? Why do I have to check if health is greater than 100? And what is this thing here? So the double pipe means or. Read that. When you see that in code, that is the word or. Just think of or in your head. So this reads, if health is greater than 0 or health is equal to 0, and then do this stuff. If either of these conditions is true, do this stuff. Print the player is dead, put the player back in the dead end, reset the player's health, and then print the room description. So this makes sense. Health equals 0, but why do I have to do or health is greater than 100? Remember that variables can only be positive numbers. So let's say I have a health of 1 or a health of 1, and I subtract 2 from it. Like my damage roll ends up being 2, and I subtract 2 from it. Well, what happens? I would be at -1, but there is no -1. What happens is it rolls over and becomes a high positive number. So what I want to do is check to see, have I hit 0, or did I go negative and roll over and become a big positive number? That's what that is checking for. Again, that's just a bit of weirdness in the way Lantern was designed. So again, this is why I'm telling you to avoid combat. But if this is true, so if your health is 0 or your health went negative and rolled over and became a big positive number, then print you've died and put the player back at the start. Now, and then just remember that events are run every turn. So every turn, the game will check, is the player in the same rune as the ogre? If that is true, print the ogre attacks, subtract a random number from the player's health, check to see if the player's health is 0 or went negative and became a high positive number, and if that is the case, then do all of this stuff, which says print the player's dead, put the player back in the dead end, set the player's health back to 100, and print the room description. So that's what that does. Now we have to add the part where the player can attack the ogre. So actually, if I run this, and let's see what happens if I say take axe, I go east. The ogre, so now I'm in the room with the ogre, and it says there's an ogre here. The ogre attacks with his club. I say wait. The ogre attacks with his club. And he attacks me again. Like he's subtracting. Every time I'm in the room with the ogre, we're subtracting a random number from the player's health. When it goes negative or becomes 0, we print that we've died, and we put the player back at the start. Okay, so that's good. That's how we have an enemy attacking us. How do we attack the enemy? Well, that's going to be a function and a sentence. So I've got a function here called kill ogre with axe. It's kind of an abbreviated version. Again, there's weird reasons why the names have to be kept under 12 characters. So what does this do? You know what? I'm going to delete all of this, and we're gonna rewrite it. So this is going to be our kill ogre with axe function. And what am I going to do? I'm going to generate a random number between 0 and 3, right? So I should get a number 0, 1, or 2. And I can say if hit is 0, print line, we miss, the ogre, right? Or something like that, right? We missed the ogre. So we did not hit. Otherwise, right, else, do this stuff. Print, I don't know. Oh, wait, why did I say we? Oh, God, sorry. You missed the ogre. never heard of a text adventure game being in the first person plural, but I'm sure somebody has done it. Okay, so you wound the ogre, right? And then what we'll do is we'll subtract 1 from his health, right? Because remember, we only gave him 3 health points, so we can say ogre health equals ogre health minus 1. So subtract 1 from ogre health and assign that whole thing. So take ogre health, subtract 1 from it, and assign it back to ogre health. And now ogre health is 1 less than it was. And now what we can do is we can check to see if it's 0. Now, by subtracting 1 every time, we don't have that possibility of going negative because we're only going down by 1. We'll hit 0 before we go negative. So ogre health equals 0. Okay, so now we've killed the ogre. Now what we get, the ogre slumps over dead or something like that. The ogre falls over dead. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll move the ogre off screen. We'll set the ogre's parent object to be off screen. And then we'll put the dead ogre in the same room as the player. Right, so the dead ogre dot holder. So the dead ogre's parent object is now the player's parent object. Basically, put the dead ogre where the player is. That's what that says. And then that should be it. So, or what we could do is we could take this and we could say otherwise print you wound the ogre. So what we're going to do here, if we roll a 0, we miss the ogre. Otherwise, subtract 1 from the ogre's health. If the ogre's health is 0, print the ogre falls over dead. Move the ogre off screen. Move the dead ogre to where the ogre was. And then if the ogre's health is not 0, print you wound the ogre. This is a better way to do it. By you give something 3 hit points and you subtract 1 every time. That way you're guaranteed to land on 0, and you don't have to worry about that weird case where you go negative and flip and become a high positive number. Okay, so now let's just check our sentences and see what we've got here. We say if we kill the ogre with the rusty axe, call the kill ogre function. Right. So let's just try it and see if it works. Take axe. Oops. Take axe. What east? Okay, so the ogre attacks. Kill ogre with axe. You miss the ogre. Kill ogre with axe. You wound the ogre. The ogre attacks with his club, and we have died. Right. So, so there it is. Let's actually. I'm going to type debug here, and I think if I type vars, it'll dump out the variables that are in the game. You can see our health got reset to 100, and we hit the ogre once, right? So his health went down to 2, right? So we started off the ogre with 3 health, and every time we hit him, we subtract 1. I highly recommend that is the way you model combat, because that way you don't have to worry about that weird case where you go negative, right? So, and I would also add a sentence here. If this were a real game, I would add a sentence called kill ogre, and just by itself, and make a function called kill ogre, and in there I would check to see if the player has the axe, and if not, say, or actually, if you just type kill ogre, I would print out, with your hands, you realize you can't attack with your hands or something like that, and that's going to force the player to realize that they need to attack with the axe. So, so there you go. That's how to set up combat, and so you're going to want an event. Just to recap, you're going to want to add variables to store your damage rolls and store the health of your enemies. You're going to want an event to make every enemy attack you if you're in the same room as that enemy. and you're going to want to add a function for attacking that particular each particular enemy, and you're going to want a sentence to call that function when you to actually be able to attack the enemy. You have to hook up that function that you wrote that does the damage to the enemy to a specific set of words that the player will type. So there you go. That's how to set up combat. And again, this example will be out on the T Drive and the Combat demo project. You can look at that, and if you need help setting up combat, by all means just ask, and I'll be happy to help you. So thanks again, and hope this is useful.